There's a way to do thumbs up and stuff, but I forget how to do that.
Budget.
Okay, everyone is using the chat. Thank you for doing that, people. Appreciate it. Okay, so our next meeting is July 29th, and it will be a Zoom meeting. I thought that I would be able to have future dates listed, but in coordinating with the City of Newport News contact person, they're not taking any reservations at this time. And I just got an email with from Yvette, who is the coordinator, and they really are not taking reservations until the executive order to stay at home lifts on June 10th. So on June 10th, I will send an email that's asking for room reservations. Obviously, everyone is practicing what we like to call adaptive management during these times. And so, you know, we'll just see what happens in terms of our availability to meet in person. We obviously want to do whatever we need to do to conform with appropriate standards. So to be determined, the continuing education credits for November, that was a pending credit. We did have one credit approved. So this is for Certified Floodplain Managers, or CFM, which is a ASFPM, Association of State Floodplain Managers designation. So one credit has been approved for that meeting, pretty consistent with what we do. January meeting, we had no CECs. This was a conversation, and it was really hard to get CECs for that. The March meeting, I'm sending to ASFPM for approval with this meeting, and I'm sure we'll get credit. So all of those credits should be populating automatically on your ASFPM member portal. If they do not, please let me know, but we've got a really smooth relationship with Anita, who does all of the CECs at ASFPM, and so it's been running like clockwork. I will look at the chat function for questions, because I will look at the chat, and you can chat me privately, and you can also chat everyone. So when you have questions or you'd like to make a comment, please just let me know. You can definitely unmute yourself and interrupt me with questions, just like regular meetings. So feel free to do that as well. Okay, so CECs. All right, today we're going to be talking about minus rated policies. This has been of great interest to lots of people, thanks to the article that was written by the New York Times, and we're so lucky to have Christopher join us. He's one of the co-authors of that piece. This is what today's meeting is going to look like. I'm going to provide a quick overview. Rich Saboto was supposed to brief us from FEMA Region 3, and I know people are going to be so frustrated, disappointed that he couldn't be here, but he was just assigned COVID response duty, and that's something that's been happening with all of our FEMA reps. Some are on duty, some are off duty. They get off duty, think they can answer questions and do things like this, and then they go back on duty. So we understand, of course, given the situation, but it is frustrating. He did send me his slides. There are no talking points, and so it's unfortunately not going to be as interactive or exciting, but he did mention that all of the questions that you have, if you can verbalize them to the group at some point, or you can include them in the chat. Either way, I will capture those questions and we will send them to him. I'll send them, and I can copy the group or whatever, however we want to do it, the participants in this meeting, to make sure those questions are answered. So I'm sorry for that, people. I'm pretty disappointed too. We're going to allow for some real insight from the localities that were featured in the New York Times article. So Jay Tate from the city of Chesapeake, and it looks like there's a Chesapeake team assembled, which is great. And then the city of Poquoson, Ken Somerset, is going to provide his insight from what's happened post-article. So we have lots of feelings about the article, and I'll get into that a little bit, but we're just going to focus on what people have done with the list and how they're moving forward in terms of addressing the issues. And then localities, of course, I assume are going to have questions about how they've been moving through the list. And Rich may not be here, but Kristen Owen, who is the Virginia NFIP state coordinator, acting coordinator, she's with DCR, and she is also an authority on this issue. And she and I have been speaking quite a bit, and she's provided me with a great deal of background. I don't live and breathe in the rating world as much as some people, and so I've been appreciative of her background, so she can answer questions as well. And then like I said, we're happy to have Christopher on the call as well. He'll be able to provide some insight and hopefully answer questions. We haven't asked him to provide a formal presentation, and so he'll be available to participate in discussion. And then Doug Reedy, who is our ISO specialist for the city, or for our whole state, is on the call, and he has provided me with an update related to the CRS manual, but he may want to offer some information additionally as well. So we'll hear from him. Okay. All right, so this was the New York Times article. I assume everybody has taken a look at it. It was sent around to the work group as a FYI, look at our city as being included in this article. And then I also sent it around in the meeting notifications for the CRS work group. So really great coverage on a lot of the issues with FEMA's enforcement of their own program. I think that, you know, just to speak very freely, I think that some people read the article as sort of throwing FEMA under the bus, and I'm in that camp. I think that it was really good at exposing a lot of the problems with how FEMA is managing their program. And then I think that there were a lot of people who felt as though the article may have been reflecting poorly on local government staff. And, you know, I think that everybody has an opinion about that. And I will just say I felt like a lot of the onus was on FEMA to not be articulating their program and communicating effectively what's expected. So that's just my 2 cents. I think that, you know, today's discussion is about minus rated, so just want to provide the definition that's been shared to me by FEMA. Minus rated properties are those that are rated with the lowest floor 1 foot or more below the base flood elevation. That rating can be for several different reasons, and we'll go into that a little bit more in detail. It could be a false, you know, it could be falsely, it's really not your first floor elevation. It could be that you have flood vents that are improperly installed, or you have utilities that are below the base flood elevation, and that can trigger that minus rated designation. Okay. Keeping track of minus rated policies. I did a bunch of research into the minus rated world and how local governments are supposed to, local floodplain managers specifically, are supposed to deal with minus rated. And what I've come up with is basically, it's a part of what the powers that be, like ASFPM and those sort of authorities have designated as good floodplain management. Unfortunately, it's not really listed anywhere in like your NFIP 273 classes and even in some of the advanced classes. And so it's a poorly advertised job for floodplain managers to be executing. I think that, you know, that's probably why a lot of communities haven't really been dealing with the list very you know, aggressively, or if at all. I think it's a communication breakdown, it seems to me. So communities could get the minus rated list in the past in Virginia, but it hasn't really been advertised or distributed in the past. And it's been communicated to me that communities typically get the list when they have a CAV or a community assistance visit. That's when FEMA comes into your community and make sure that you're being compliant with the NFIP minimum standards. It's not related to the CRS 5-year cycle visit. It's completely separated just for NFIP participating communities. FEMA comes in and does CAVs, DCR does CAVs. We're definitely not doing it every 5 years, and that was something that I think was brought up in the New York Times article. So I think, you know, you can get the information. You used to be able to get it from DCR, then you weren't able to get it for a while, and now you can get it from DCR. And so Kristen will be able to speak more about that. And so there are also issues with how frequently it's updated, which is no surprise. We're talking about a FEMA resource, so that doesn't surprise anybody. Interestingly, to me at least, the list is created based on the actual flood insurance policies. It's not created, as I understand it, based on like actual, you know, NFIP mapping or FEMA mapping. It's not based on the firm. It's not based on LIDAR collecting first floor elevations, nothing sophisticated like that. It's based on whatever the agent has submitted to the NFIP for the writing of the policy. So it should be based on the elevation certificate. And there are, you know, countless issues with that being the case, right? So surveyors don't always fill out the ECs correctly, which we, of course, know in great detail, excruciating detail. And so that is where a lot of the breakdown occurs. Each property owner, I don't think that localities can really update their list. This is information that's been shared with me. The individual communities or individual people with the policies would actually have to contact their flood insurance agent to modify the policy. And we all know that that could present quite a big problem, because the people that are writing the policies, with the exception of some really fine flood insurance agents, and we have Ken Evans, who's on the call today, and he is an example of someone who knows the ins and outs of the program, who works in the insurance industry. And, you know, we also have Kurt from SmartVent. So we know that there are people who are doing a really good job, and they're certainly in our circle, but there are a lot of people who work in the flood insurance world who know nothing about writing policies, the ins and outs. They just plug and play. And if you were to call them and say, oh, my property is minus rated, how can I address that? There may be issues with that being addressed with the typical agent. So what is considered the minus rated list is considered, properties are considered out of compliance when it comes to this list. And this may not be you know, the case, right? So minus rated policies could be pre-firm policies, which are out of compliance because they're not up to standard codes, but they're not required to be unless they suffer 50% or more damage. And so, you know, that is one issue. Out of compliance could definitely define some of the properties on the minus rated list, because this could be a property that has its flood vents covered, which happens all the time, or they've enclosed or finished a space below the BFE, which they are really not supposed to do. So there could be real non-compliance issues with properties on this list. I'm not saying it's always an accident. And I'm sure the local government staff who are going to present today from Chesapeake and Poquoson will confirm that that's probably the case, hopefully. So people are thinking that this list is all related to compliance, as I've mentioned, but it's really a list that's based on insurance policy data that could be inaccurate at the time that the policies are created. Let's see. So the typical issues that bring the first floor elevation or the first floor elevation incorrectly captured are flood vents or utilities, and enclosed floors. Okay, and this is, again, the minus rated policies is only capturing those NFIP policies. It's not capturing any private insurance. Okay. All right, so I have questions, and I just threw the slide together so I wouldn't forget to ask them. But you know, it might work better that my questions are asked later, because we're going to get to them at some point after our local staff talk. So I'm going to hold off on them, but I want to pull them up to show you what I'm thinking. Okay, finally, and then I'm going to be done. I just wanted to share with you the research that I did to figure out that examining minus rated policies and even addressing those minus rated policies, either for inaccuracies or to bring minus rated policies that are non-compliant into compliance. What I found was that communities that are doing a really good job at this are doing it, and it seems like it's a higher standard because it's not discussed in all of the standard coursework for NFIP, education. So this guy, Stephen Dodd, won the CRS Award for Excellence in 2014. And this was in Dorchester, Maryland. And so Doug may be familiar with this group because Doug Reedy used to work in the local government world in Maryland, and I forget which community he was with. But so this guy won the CRS award because he was looking at the 10% of the whole flood insurance policies in the county were actually minus rated. And when your property is minus rated, I should have said this at the beginning, you don't earn CRS credit. It's like properties that are preferred risk policies. So if you don't have to have flood insurance, but you have it, you don't get CRS points. Similarly, if you're minus rated, you don't get CRS points either. So for our group, this matters. And 10% of all of their policies is pretty significant. I would love to hear the breakdown from from Chesapeake and Poquoson if you have it. So this guy went to each property owner on that list, or at least many of them, and he worked with them to figure out why they were minus rated. So quite a huge undertaking, it sounds like, and this would be especially enormous for communities as large as the city of Chesapeake, city of Virginia Beach, and Norfolk. Poquoson may be a little bit more manageable, but nevertheless, this is an example of a community that took on the minus rated list. And then finally, I guess I have two more examples. This is really interesting. This is from the NFIP CRS program. This is their update newsletter that happens every month or every 2 months. There was a big article on minus rated policies as it relates to the CRS program. This is in response to the 2008 policy that made minus rated properties not eligible for the CRS credit. So there's a link to this report or this newsletter that will be available through the PDF version of the PowerPoint slides. So I would encourage you to take a look and you can read for yourself, but very interesting that in response to this change of the manual and of the program, communities were interviewed to see how they felt about this change. And a lot of local officials, this is coming from this article, were not aware of the problem of buildings being on this list. And they weren't often aware of the list. And that seems to be pretty relevant to our discussion today. Let's see. Oops, it's taking me to the link. Hold on. Okay, let me advance this slide. And then also in 2012, but in November, not in March, if you've ever read the ASFPM Insider, it's the newsletter that's available to ASFPM members and CEC people who have CFMs. Rebecca Quinn is basically someone who writes a little blurb in the newsletter called Floodplain Manager's Notebook. She's been doing it for years. And Lee Chapman, who's a consultant in our region, writes with her as a guest all the time. They work together. She discussed the minus rated policy issue as well and provided some commentary on this. And so, she talked about incorrectly rated as properties that are incorrectly rated as post-firm buildings, even though they hadn't been substantially damaged or improved. buildings that were in compliance when the flood map became effective at the time of construction, but were rated minus on a more recent map change. And I guess these properties should have been grandfathered in. And then elevation certificates being used in conflict with a design certification, which, you know, I don't know how frequently that actually happens. And then also issues that I know are going to be discussed by Chesapeake and Poquoson. So this type of attention to this issue has happened, but it has been, you know, less in the open and widely discussed. And I know that the New York Times article was great at bringing these issues to everyone's attention. Okay, so this is Rich's presentation. So I'm just going to run through it. So get your questions ready and type them in the chat box, or just go ahead and speak them out. Let's see, so he provides a definition for minus rated buildings, post-firm or pre-firm building that's rated as post-firm that are in the high-risk flood zones where the elevation difference is at least 1 foot or more below BFE. All right. This is how minus rated properties are related to the CRS. They are not eligible for CRS discounts. This is just the chart from the CRS manual. This is not a surprise to anybody. Actually, I don't think this is from the CRS manual. I don't know where this is from. Anyone know where this is located, where you can find this? Flood insurance manual. Okay, thanks, Kristen. Why would a pre-firm building be rated as post-firm? That's a good question. Kristen Boyd. Okay, does anyone know why a pre-firm building would be rated as post-firm? Oh wait, so let's go back. I mean, incorrectly rated. Anyone know? Let me see if I have notes on this. Yeah, I mean, this is just one of the things that came up in Rebecca Quinn's article, that some pre-firm buildings were incorrectly rated as post-firm. Okay, so Kristen says, sometimes they can be rated as post-firm if they submit an EC or an actuarial rate. The flood insurance manual goes over a lot of the ratings as well. So how frequently is that happening, Kristen? Kristen Owen. Well, so for example, there are a lot of inaccuracies in ECs, and the NFIP rates policies incorrectly all the time. And so there are people who have a business in our region that go to property owners who have very high flood insurance rates and say, hey, let's get an EC, an updated EC, and see if something's been rated incorrectly, and maybe that will help your flood insurance premium go down. Property owners, there's a risk in this, because property owners that submit for a new EC could actually be, they could be rated higher than they currently are in terms of their flood insurance premium. And according to what you're saying, Kristen, if they were to submit, they would be rated for an actual, would they be rated as an actuarial, would they be given an actuarial rate if they submit a new EC, or would they be operating in the same rate structure that may be grandfathered or whatever? I assume she's typing. You can unmute yourself too, Kristen.
That would be a lot easier. I'm just looking at the flood insurance manual. And so it breaks down, like they can use the post-firm rating if it's more favorable for their price,
Right.
but the agent is supposed to use the submit per rate to process it. And I don't know if Ken wants to chime in or anything on this since he actually does this. So I don't know, like on the back end, I don't know if they're supposed to do something so that they can get the CRS rate. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily incorrect that they're being rated as post-firm because that's what they're asking for. But I don't know if there's something on the back end that they're supposed to designate so that it still shows up, you know, that it's a pre-firm building. It's not necessarily non-compliant to get that CRS credit.
Okay. Homeowners. Yep.
Can you, this is Ken Evans, just to put that out there, about half of our new business recently has been actuarially rated pre-firm structures. And they do receive the CRS discount. This process requires that we go around the normal rating protocols, and we have to email directly to the unit that does this. They give us a quote, and then if issued, it will show up as a submit for rate. Submit for rate's been around for a while. The actuarial technology that we're using now has really only been applied for the last couple of years. So there is a provision to do this. There is no downside because there's always the standard pre-firm rate. And if the actuarial rate is higher, then the default level is going to be the standard pre-firm rate.
Okay.
So could an agent submit it without doing the whole submit per rate process to make that the error where they wouldn't get a CRS credit?
See, I think the process has evolved quite a bit in the last 5 or 6 years with increasing technology. There's no way to get around this process. The unit that does this typically does this with a limited number of agents. We know what we need to submit. There's 3 forms that have to be signed and submitted, current pictures, and once the rating's established, it's their FEMA rate. It is not a manual rate, which is the submit for rate designation. So you can't do this on our own and somehow create a minus rated policy. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Yep. And Kurt is commenting similarly. Okay. Okay. Things to remember about minus rated building reports. Okay. Privacy concerns. Yeah. What else is new? Since these reports may include property addresses. Okay. Right. So no distribution. Okay, so this is where I'm going to ask my question because it feels relevant. So New York Times, Christopher, can you tell us how you went about getting the minus rated lists, and were you working with actual lists?
Yeah, my colleague, John Schwartz, got that data from FEMA. It was not in response to a FOIA. They agreed to provide it to us. It was a list in the sense that we got numbers of properties by census tract. We did not get individual addresses for privacy reasons. And then we spent months, just months, going through that list with some folks at UC Davis who crunched those numbers. We went back to FEMA. We went to some of the communities. We spent, I think it was more than 8 months trying to make sense of the data we got from FEMA and trying to figure out what it meant. It was not straightforward. We got somewhat conflicting accounts from FEMA and from local authorities. We get somewhat conflicting accounts from FEMA over time, and then we get somewhat conflicting accounts from outside experts who were neither federal nor local officials. And just to the point that's been raised here, there's a ton of reasons why any given property would be in that list, right? They could be mapped in because they were built to compliance, and then the land they were on got mapped into a floodplain afterwards. they could be inaccurately characterized, or they could just be too low. So, it was a tough issue. We tried to be thoughtful with how we presented it. I know at the top of this meeting, you indicated that some people thought we were too harsh on FEMA. Others thought we were too harsh on local officials. I guess that means we did it right.
Yeah.
Because, the thing that really stuck with me from that story wasn't so much who is in the wrong, though I think there's enough sort of mistakes to go around. It was more just the dilemma here, right? That if you're FEMA and you've got this policy on your books, what do? Right? I think we closed, I haven't read the piece in a while, but I think we closed with the case of Louisiana and those homes that were destroyed or mostly destroyed by the flooding in 2017 or 16. And this debate, FEMA is saying when you rebuilt these homes, you didn't elevate. Local officials saying, yeah, you're right, we didn't elevate. We didn't have the money to elevate. And if we didn't rebuild the homes, people would have nowhere to stay. So what do you want us to do? And we put that question to FEMA, and they're like, you know what? They've got a big problem on their hands. And FEMA officials, to their credit, seemed to be appreciative of the dilemma that these rules impose, as did local officials. So it's not like there was a right answer that we could sort of point fingers at and say, you should do this. I think it was an important story because there's no good answer. So I'm happy to field other questions. I'm afraid I got to jump at 11 or so, but I'm happy to answer more about it.
Yeah, that's great. And, I think that there's so much misinformation about how those properties were handled after those floods. Like, there were so many news articles that discussed how FEMA was perfectly aware that they were going to get a buy in coming into compliance. I mean, that's what I recall reading. And I thought, well, I guess FEMA makes the rules sometimes and they don't enforce the rules other times for, real human need reasons. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciated that ending. So let's since you have a time situation, let's have comments, because I don't think this presentation is going to provide us with very much answers. So from FEMA, so we can open it up to discussion if that's helpful for our members on the call. If anybody has any questions for Christopher. Oh, Kristen is saying it'd be good for him to hear the, okay, I agree. Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna move forward. We'll come back to this if it's important, but honestly, it's just a lot of background. So let's go ahead and have Jay present what they've been up to in the city of Chesapeake. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Kristen Boyd, you should be able to share your screen, no problem.
I'm going to start talking while Kristen pulls up the information.
Getting an error. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, great.
Do you want to email the presentation while I talk? That's kind of what I was thinking was the backup plan. Okay, so Mary, in addition to what I was going to present, I did want to answer a couple of your questions that you had on your list. First of all, before the reporter contacted me as the floodplain administrator for the city of Chesapeake, I was unaware of the minus rated list and did absolutely nothing with that as far as the responsibilities of conducting my part-time job as floodplain administrator. I'm actually the director of development and permits, so I'm responsible for the construction of all activities in the city of Chesapeake, which includes houses. So I had, a secondary concern when we started talking about minus rated properties. When the reporter contacted me, I was pretty amazed at the volume that he explained that FEMA had us on record as having in the city of Chesapeake. So I think my first response was, this can't be right. And I think between him and some information I received, I did request the minus rated list and immediately sought to try to figure out exactly why we had such a high volume. And it took forever to get the minus rated list. First of all, I finally had to get some people with our emergency management group to pull some strings and get it. And we began, I want to say, in about the same time as when the article came out. So we were already looking at the list. I was in the camp that said the article reflected poorly on the localities, because I thought there was a certain implied message that there were a bunch of structures being built that didn't meet the requirements. And I know since I've been the director, we've been requiring freeboard. So even if you were off by a datum or something, your finished floors should greatly exceed the BFEs in like under the most extreme conditions. So that's one of the reasons why we were just so adamant that we needed to go through and we needed to review the list. First, because people might be paying too much. And second, because now there's this impression that, you know, we weren't applying the minimum building standards that's required by the NFIP. So any luck on getting the presentation? Okay, so we got the list, and the first thing we did when we had the list was we tried to reconcile what records we had compared to the records of what FEMA had. And as we did this, we did multiple sortings, and we tried to break these things down into categories as we reviewed each and every one. And the first thing we did is we sorted it by date. And what we found was when we started looking at these lists, in some cases, the newer ones, we actually still had elevation certificates on hand. And we only started keeping our elevation certificates as a permanent record, I want to say in about 2011 or 2012. And so we had all those elevation certificates on hand. And when we went back and looked at the minus rated structures that we had elevations on hand, elevation certificates on hand, 100% of them, the finished floor was significantly above the BFE. So now that we have this presentation up on the screen, let me kind of run through the statistics and then a couple of examples. So on our minus rated list, we think we had 753 properties. Of those, by looking at the CO date of the structures themselves, we felt 578 were built post-firm. Of those 578 that were minus rated but built post-firm, we had 28 with elevation certificates. All 28 of those significantly exceeded the BFE. So even if you had an adjustment when we redid the maps in 2014, you would still be, with any kind of adjustment, you would still be well above the BFE. So they shouldn't have been minus rated. The next group, and I talked about, we had, prior to 2011, we didn't keep the elevation certificates, but we did make mainframe notes that indicated various information about how we issued the CO and what was required. So in those cases, 266 of those, we are extremely confident that the finished floor was above the BFE and they had elevation certificates that met the minimum requirements. The last category in the post-VRM group were properties with no floodplain data located. And given the other information and the date that these structures were built, we feel that these were probably, but we don't have any information to justify that, are probably post. And so let's go, and we will come back to that question, Mary, because we're actually going to pull up an elevation certificate.
Okay.
In the pre-firm properties, this is going by the date of the original CO, and we wondered if it was pre-firm, why it would even be on the minus rated list, because we thought, we're not insurance experts, but if you're pre-firm, you would have some type of grandfathering of your insurance rates. And I don't know if you want to pause and anyone wants to answer, you know, why that would be. Okay, I'll move on. And then lastly, on the list, we had some structures that we felt were pre-firm based on the date of construction, and they were listed as post-firm. So I'm not sure why that would be the case. So these are the categories of where we think our minus rated properties were. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but we couldn't find one example of a case where there was a lack of any type of local building requirements applied, you know, unlike the Louisiana example where people knowingly constructed it or might have missed something. So let's advance to the next slide. Okay, so this is actually a clip from our analysis. And if you look, the highlighted, that's 249 Deepwater Drive. The information in green is the minus rated list that was provided from FEMA. So you'll note that it has a BFE of 8 and an elevation difference of -2. And then if you look to the right, you will see in yellow from our building records, we have an elevation certificate on file. And based on that elevation certificate, which I'm going to show you in a minute, it'll indicate the BFE is 8, but the finished floor is 11.1. So in our minds, that should be a +3, not a -2. And so let's advance to the next screen. So in the next screen, this wasn't intentional that we made this so you can't read it, but this is what happens if you scan and rescan and rescan. If you look down on the left, you will see the base flood elevation is correctly noted as 8. And then if you look to the right, the elevation in the top of the next highest floor is 11.1. And so for this type of construction, it was an 8. You should be using that box. Now, if we were trying to forensically figure out why they're listing it as a -2, the garage is at a 6. So you could theorize that maybe an insurance agent picked the 6 and said, well, that's the lowest floor, and therefore they're going to be rated as having a 6, even though that's a storage area that's completely vented. This is very new construction. And we just feel like this is an example of something that appears to have been constructed properly and is listed on the minus rated erroneously. Okay, our next example is the second type. In these, we have a mainframe, and it was our practice that when we approved the elevation certificate, we would enter certain information into our mainframe, and then at some later date, some retention cycle of 3 years, we would then dispose of those documents, but the mainframe would still be maintained, those records. So in this particular case, 2252 Angler Lane, it's showing up as an elevation difference of -1. And the only information we have is what's on the right side, that the lowest floor is at 12.4. The foundation type, again, is a type 8. And the current BFE is an 8. So we also, incidentally, part of our record keeping is what was the engineering firm that actually provided the elevation certificate. So that might play into some homeowners' later ability to go back and review how do I get the right insurance rate? So this is one of the bigger categories of the total minus rated list. And here's an example of the information that was from our mainframe. If you look at the bottom, the elevation highlighted, the 12.4, and the engineering company that actually provided the elevation certificate. And one of the other numbers not highlighted is the actual date of the elevation certificate itself. And this, you know, despite Ken's earlier explanation on pre-firms that are listed as post-firm, in our minds, we were still thinking pre-firm properties shouldn't be on the minus rated list. And maybe I can talk to Rich or Kristen later and you can try to explain it for slower people. But we have 175 properties which we believe are pre-firm that are on the minus rated list. And a bunch of them indicate post-firm, and we don't know how they got rated as post-firm. And maybe it seems like if you applied for insurance based on an elevation certificate, you wouldn't request an elevation certificate and an actuarial rating if you were going to be minus rated. It seems like you would want to stay pre-firm. So that is the examples of the different categories. And these are the questions that I had that I was hoping somebody with a lot of good information could provide. And Mary, I don't know if you want me to just run through these questions or.
Sure.
Okay. So my number one question is, you know, forget our reputation as local officials. Are we making people build things right? How can we help property owners make sure that they have the right insurance rate? Because if they're listed as minus rating, my suspicion would be they're paying a lot more for insurance than they otherwise should be if they're really 3 foot above instead of 2 foot below. So I don't know how we get these things fixed. We had a couple of suggestions. You know, is there some way we can dump this information back on the insurance providers and say, it appears y'all might have messed this thing up. Y'all should take the lead on fixing it. Or is it up to individual property owners and we just need to notify them, you know, you need to go back to your insurance carrier because there may be something wrong, and we would just provide them with information that we had and make them track it down. So I think that's really number one in my mind. How do we go about, you know, helping this list get fixed correctly?
Jay, if you don't mind, part of my concern is that we're getting lists with information that seems to be contradictory. I've got one I've just issued with an actuarial rate on it. It shows a -3 elevation. If you're auditing for a variance to BFE, it's going to show that when it picks up the audit. That rate was actually half of what a normal pre-firm rate would be because it was actuarially rated. I think that trying to also go back 20 or 30 years where the data collected is not even defined the same way as it is currently. It is extremely difficult to try to make sweeping observations about what I see out of this minus rated list. So I understand your concern, and somebody who's on the minus rated list really can go back to their agent or go directly to NFIP or the Write Your Own and make sure that there's a review on file that they can look at. With every manual change, with every BFE change, with every map change, these policies are reviewed at renewal. So because they're on this minus rated list does not necessarily result in a financial penalty to the property owner. So, you know, I'm a little bit suspicious about the data that we're getting from NFIP and trying to interpret it. Okay, and maybe we need just a follow-up conversation with Rich to see
if, you know, if you're saying that we have a list of 753, but that might not be reflective of 753 paying high insurance policies, do they want to narrow it down before we send out some kind of letter that tells them you need to review your insurance policy data? And maybe Rich is the guy who's ultimately going to have to say, you know, go by the list, or don't go by the list, go by a different list.
So I think one of the things that makes this confusing is that the list from FEMA is just solely based on the policy data. So it's just a raw list of anybody that's below, which, as Ken said, doesn't necessarily mean they're getting a higher rate, and they could still be getting the CRS discount, and they may not be non-compliant. But the way that this list is shared and used in CAVs is as an indicator of non-compliance, because it is an easy way to go find potential non-compliant structures. But you can't just look at it as saying all of these are wrong or getting higher rates. But it's also like nearly impossible to figure that out, as you've experienced going through all of the data. And then the list that we get doesn't even really give us all of the information. But I think I'll ask FEMA if there's a way they can download a report that would indicate whether or not they're getting the CRS discount, because that might be a way to narrow down the list. Because if they're not getting the discount, then that to me would be a true minus rated, you know, policy that we need to look at to see, is there a problem with this? Because if they're pre-firm and just getting rated post-firm because it's cheaper for them, they should have gone through that submit for rate process that Ken talked about, and they should still be able to get the CRS discount. I can't download that. I can look at policies and see that they have a CRS discount or not, but I can't download any of them. And since you all have hundreds, sometimes thousands of these addresses, there's no way for me to go through them individually and tell you that. But FEMA has staff that can download different reports for us. It will probably take forever, as you've also experienced, if I can't download it, but we can ask them that. The other thing would be, you know, to just send a letter, you know, to the property owners and explain, maybe, you know, you'd have to be very clear about how you write it so that it's not saying that they have a violation or anything, but, you know, to check, do they have flood vents still? Because if they don't, if they filled them in, then that's why they're going to be on the minus rated list. Or did they use engineered flood vents and they didn't submit the documentation? So those are the kinds of things, you know, or just put it out there that they could contact you. When we do your CAV, we'll drive around and do this. That could be something else you do, is like pull a sample and just do a quick drive through and see, you know, yeah, when they built this 10 years ago, they had an EC that said they had flood vents and they're 3 feet above the BFE, but now those flood vents are filled in, or, you know, they've done something else like that.
I've just been notified. So also from the Chesapeake team, Rob Braidwood, who's the Director of Emergency Management, has a question.
Hey, yeah, so can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so to Jay's point, you know, about what to do with some of these questions and you know, the rep from DCR kind of talking about what the next steps are to sort of chase down some of this. And see, the thing for us is that I think if you send these questions to Rich, you'll get the typical Rich response, which won't really do anything. And so what I would suggest is, if the group boils down some really just boils down the ask of what we need to do to fix this thing, what I'd like to do is bring it to the regional administrator for Region 3 for us. There's a regional advisory committee that I'm the vice chair of that was supposed to be meeting in a month or so to talk about different issues that happen in Region 3. So, you know, you're talking about Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and they were going to have a very, very floodplain focused regional advisory committee meeting coming up in June. Now that's been canceled because of COVID, obviously, but that I've been told that the regional administrator, Marianne Tierney, is going to still want to have that mitigation floodplain centric meeting. And so I'd like to get this topic put on that meeting, which has got the state directors and the mitigation folks from headquarters and Region 3 there at the meeting. So if we can boil this thing down and have an ask for them to fix it, I think that's a really good way to maybe start moving the ball forward. But just my 2 cents.
Rob, will you also, and for the FEMA folks on the phone, request that the NFIP coordinators get an invite to this meeting, because we're not invited to any of this. And I will tell you, the schmoes probably don't have a clue what the minus rated list is.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that I think if we can kind of use this as a opportunity to educate, because the regional administrators typically have the authority to fix these things as long as they're not in the CFR. If it's a policy thing, then they can go sweep in and kind of adjust these things quickly. If it's something that's laid out in the CFR, then that's obviously a different issue. But a lot of times they have no clue what's going on in their mitigation departments, or that there's some jacked up process like it looks like we've got. And so we might be able to get it fixed if we have a clear consensus on what we're asking them to fix. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Can I step in just for a sec? I gotta jump off soon too. Just I really appreciate the chance to be here and hearing on this. One thing that we noted in the story, maybe we didn't emphasize it strongly enough, was that FEMA certainly told us they don't really know, right? All they know is that all these things are going on. Some of these properties were mapped in after they were constructed. Some of these properties are in violation. Some of these properties, the data is inaccurate. The only way they know is when they do that community assistance visit. And I think one of the most important findings in the story was that those visits are so rare, and becoming more rare. So one of my takeaways was I was surprised about FEMA's, the state of FEMA's data, and the fact that they're not being more aggressive about verifying it. So to anybody in this call, if there's more that comes out of this that you think we should look at, I don't know my email address is just first.last@nytimes.com. Please reach out. I'd love to hear about it. I think it's an important issue. We don't have anything further in the works right now, but if there's some sort of development or news, we'll look at it again. I don't know if this is bad Zoom etiquette, but just before I get off the call, on a separate note, the big thing with COVID now, right, seems to be to what degree are communities pulling back on flood mitigation projects or efforts because of money, where that is they can't find the money for their local match, they don't have the local budget for their own projects, whatever it is. That seems like one of the big stories of this summer and the fall. So if any of you feel that there's projects you're looking at that you can't do, or you're feeling other effects of the sort of the fallout from COVID, please do reach out. I think it's a really important issue. I'm in DC, so in theory I can drive down to most of you, though who knows. So I'm around, and it's an important issue, and I'm glad to have been on this call. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for being a part of it. And yeah, I know that we've been talking about the COVID impact on flood mitigation projects, so I'll definitely reach out to you, and we can talk to some of the people on the call as well.
Wonderful. All right, guys, have a good day. I gotta go.
Well, thanks.
MC, I've got a comment.
Yeah. Hey, Tom.
So I noticed Kurt has made a couple of comments of the resources that SmartVent offers. You had mentioned another company. I don't remember the name of that company, but Kurt's comments are in the chat.
Do you want me to give the answer to the company that I was talking about?
No, I wasn't sure everybody saw Kurt's comments in the chat box.
Okay, let's see. So Kurt, you can unmute yourself if you want. Flood risk evaluation. Yeah.
Obviously, one of the divisions of floodproofing.com is we do have an insurance division. And within that division, what we do for homeowners, that communicate directly with us for solutions is to evaluate elevation certificates complimentary. We've also offered that as an outreach program for communities nationally, and we do a lot of them where we'll actually provide one-on-one communication based on how that community is messaging the information. Again, we deal with all sorts of issues regarding the privacy issues and concerns, but we basically customize those approaches by community based on their needs. But we have a full in-house team. All our agents, we are obviously, work directly with the underwriter, so we are a broker, and we're able to evaluate elevation certificates for these communities regardless of quantity, and either provide one-on-one direct feedback on what flood mitigation steps may be needed, identifying, number one, if there's an issue, number two, what steps could be taken. And again, we have a database that we've provided the NFIP, basically showing every interaction that we've had and what we found. I can share that information with the group, but you'd be amazed at, probably 38% of what we see is easily mitigated and solved at very little cost to the homeowner. But the data is impressive. It kind of helps give you a picture of what's going on out there and what areas you might be able to focus on. But again, we do this, offer this service as a resource to the communities. A lot of you wear hats, many hats, and don't have the time or resources to really dive into it. But again, just wanted to put it out there that you don't have to give up the privacy. You don't have to give up the risk of having your insurance increased if you look into it. Everything is kept confidential, and they can just get the report back and make their decision or keep the insurance they have. So just wanted to put it out there. It's always been there, and one of the resources we have.
One of your other comment, Kurt, I think is really interesting. It's in the chat. What ordinance enhancements exist or could be added to impact the negative rated policy levels moving forward? I think that that's something that we can think about before the offer to take this issue to the Region 3 administrator and to that group. Maybe brainstorming on what could be done as a higher standard would be really helpful. And maybe even we could have a brief discussion after Pocosin presents. Maybe that presentation will help get our juices flowing too. I personally would like to work on that because I think that would be really interesting to see if it could be changed.
We're actually moving on that. We've got a webinar that we're going to be hosting with some ideas. Number one, identifying some of the latest ordinance enhancements that have come out. I'll be hosting that actually tomorrow at, I believe, 3 p.m. We'll have a lot of the NFIP state coordinators on there, some VeriRisk people, the underwriter as well, to answer questions with regard to that. Happy to put that invitation out to anyone that'd like to join the call and share thoughts. But one of the ideas that really caught storm was introducing a flood opening agreement similar to the non-conversion agreement, and either combining the two and giving a compliance mechanism at point of sale, which there are some ordinances out there that do that. We'll have Sea Isle and Cape May from New Jersey will be speaking to the ordinances that they have. So again, it's just an informative opportunity to kind of interact back and forth, hear some other ideas, and share your own. So,
do you want to include the link in the chat box, Kurt, with the information?
Sure, be happy to.
Yeah, that'd be good. Do we want to move? Well, do we want to keep going on these questions, everybody, or do we want to move to Pocosin and then circle back and do more questions? Jay, how's the Chesapeake team feeling?
I think maybe the questions would be better later, or maybe just directed to Rich.
Okay.
I did want to follow up on, we did have a CAV, our last one was in 2012, I think about 6 months after I started doing the floodplain administrator. And of course, they updated our ordinance, so we don't think that, we wouldn't be compliant at this point. The other thing is, when they went through all our previous construction, the only thing they found through the whole CAV visit was, I want to say, 4 structures that the city hadn't required to be vented because the lowest adjacent grade was above the BFE. So in 2012, we were working under the assumption if the whole structure was above the BFE, even though it was mismapped, you wouldn't have to have vents. And as a result of that, we actually took the initiative to get them LOMAs. So the only 4 blemishes on the audit were removed by the city applying for LOMAs for where there were no vents, even though they were above the BFA.
Mm. Okay.
So I guess Ken can take off.
Okay, cool. All right, so Ken, you're not muted. Okay, so let me switch gears. I have Ken's presentation here with me. Okay, so Ken sent a PDF and I have the PDF split into 2 different slides, Ken. So that's how I've organized it. So go ahead. This is the first slide. It's the top of your PDF.
As you can see on the list, Potosin has 602 structures listed on the minus rated list. We went through that and we took the sample of 101 addresses compared to elevation certificates we had on file. And the elevation certificates range from some back in the late 1970s up to current ones. So we were getting a wide range of that. I thought it was interesting earlier, Ken Evans had made a comment, that a lot of this was, some of this information was taken from elevation certificates that they never addressed flood venting, or it just gave you a lowest floor. A finished floor. So, one of the problems we were having is that a lot of these were based on information that wasn't as accurate as it is now. So, that was one of our problems that we were having with it. We do have an active policy that's, I've been here since 2004, and we've been very adamant very active with requesting citizens to give us elevation certificates, no matter the year, date, or whenever it is. Obviously any new construction, we require that, we keep it, but we have a good response from citizens constantly giving us old elevation certificates. It's the only thing that they have, so that we can have a living history of the city and kind of build from that. So from that, we've got a lot of good information and stuff. One of the things we did find, we noticed that we had some out of the 101, we had 12 structures that did have finished floor below BFE. Those structures, those were elevation certificates that were done a long time ago, very long time ago. So, to say, beyond that, I'm not sure. We did have 36 properties that were listed on the repetitive loss list also, which I thought was an interesting, a third of what we had sampled was on both lists, which I thought was very interesting. We did notice that we had a lot that didn't have, that don't have the appropriate amount of flood venting, or it never wasn't even listed as having flood venting. And that was based on the information that the elevation certificate didn't provide. So we had an issue with that. We had concerns with that. Based off everything we came up with, the biggest question, I think it's an interesting thing, is that this list is made. Citizens don't know about it. We are prepared to do a mass mailing to 601 citizens, just giving them a polite general overview saying, hey, you may want to contact us. We about your policy, being as generic as possible, but encouraging them to again contact us to discuss it and go through the process and see what we as the city can do to assist them. If that means we're encouraging them when necessary to give new elevation certificates to see if we can help them review that and go through that. One of the concerns we have, though, is the fact that a lot of the stuff has, the things where the engineered vents are in place, but knowing and a lot of agents don't understand how to read an elevation certificate to begin with, and a lot of them don't seem that they really care to even consider learning how to read an elevation certificate, and they'll look at the list and say, oh, you don't have any flood vents in your garage. Well, look down at the bottom and see, is the finished floor of the garage higher than BFE? If it is, it's not required. Or they'll put down that they'll see that the number is different, but they don't look to the information under the comment section that will address engineered flood vents. So, we just have some concerns with that. And I guess the biggest one, my takeaway so far this morning has been that homeowners have to go to the agent to have the agent correct the information. And again, they're going back to an agent that doesn't really care. To them, it's just, and I've heard it many times, it's a FEMA program. But we know that if you don't put the correct information in, you're not going to get correct information back, and the homeowner's going to be the one losing out in the process. And, if an agent gets a percentage off the policy to work diligently to reduce somebody's premium with correct information, is taking profit out of the pocket, and they have no desire to do that. And I will say that I know of a very few agents like Mr. Evans who will work diligently to help the citizen or help the consumer with the insurance rate. So, there's some concerns there from our part as far as how the information was gathered and then how to get it corrected.
Do you want me to go to your questions?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you. These were just some basic questions. Some of them have been updated or have been answered already. But it's some things that we had just concerns about. These were just questions we came up with, and a lot of what Jay and I had talked about some of these questions and some of these things together. And like Jay, and no disrespect to the New York Times article, I did take it as being a slight or a slap to local community not doing their job. And that was a very hard thing for me to take because I know that we worked very diligently here to make sure that information is correct. And then to hear about a list that we didn't know about, and we were finally able to get information from it, and looking at it, it's an interesting process. One question that I don't know, we can't answer it today, but that would be great would be the definitions for the data rated method description codes that they use when we look at that list. I don't understand, they say this, they give you a code, but you don't understand what to mean. So, for us as city officials to be able to help a citizen try to understand it, if we don't have the information and we don't know what they're talking about, the citizen has no clue or concept to do it. And if they're relying on an insurance agent to give them information, it's going to be, the agent may not even understand what they're talking about, so it's tough. And so when we, as government employees, our job is to do the best we can for the citizen, they don't come to us and ask questions. And we need to have the information to be able to try to help them. I do like the idea of doing if we do a regional thing, whatever it is, to try to get assistance and see how we can move forward with this. I'm all in favor of that.
Anybody have any questions for Ken? It's pretty amazing that y'all have elevation certificates that span back that long. It's really amazing. I don't know of other communities that have that
Yeah, I've
kind
got,
of record.
I've got one from 1972 that was on a old fact sheet. So you have to really be have good eyesight to try to read some of the information. But the citizens here have done good, and we've done a lot of work trying to catalog them, and we have them in notebooks, and so it's very good for us to be able to look at that. And then a big part of it is, again, we have a living history. So if we have old ones and new ones, we've got to to try to work from something that's there.
Kristen, when we were talking a while ago, you mentioned something that puts people in the minus rated list as it relates to the V zone. I guess if the enclosed lowest floor is greater than 299 square feet, then it's automatically the lowest floor, even if it's just used for storage or parking. I don't recall off the top of my head what Pecoson's V zone looks like, but I would bet there is some good bit of V zone in Pecoson. Can your list, excuse me, let me go back. 12 structures have the finished floor elevation. So that 89 group, maybe there are some that are captured in that sample group that have the situation that Kristen has discussed with me with the enclosed floor being used for parking. I mean, we all know that Pecoson's homes are mega elevated, so I don't know if that's something.
I have a question to Ken, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Ken, you said that you have a list of 602 structures minus rated, and also you have a sample of 101 addresses. Is this 101 as part of the 602 or throughout the city?
No, it was part of the original list. I just I took the list and from there just started going through it. Started with addresses and just started working through, and based off the list. So to say we went to 101, I probably went through maybe half of the list to get the 101 elevation certificates actually to compare the information to.
So your sample, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, well, if you have 89 structures finished floor elevation above base flood elevation, so those shouldn't be part of your list because they're above base flood elevation.
Well, I think
right?
that's kind of the point.
Right. Like, yeah, it's like, to Jay's point, all the number of homes they have that were above BFE. We had a lot, and we have them with, getting freeboard on several, on majority of them. And it was, and that's why I couldn't understand the list as far as what put it on there. I did, working through the list, I was looking on the ones I could find. I'd say I got 12 structures that are below base flood. I understand that. That would be a solid reason for a minus rated policy.
Right.
But then I also started looking, and that's when I noticed, some of them where they did have information on flood vents, a lot of them maybe didn't have enough flood vents. They weren't current with that. So that made me think that, and if I'm understanding correctly, that would be a reason for being on the minus rated list, would be not having enough flood venting in the structure, be it the house or the garage.
And the other thing, Mary Carson, just for the whole group, if we are talking about this kind of policies minus rated, if there's a property or structures 1 feet or more below the base flood elevation, so what will be the insurance cost or fee for this type of structures that they have that much low elevation? So what will be the beneficial for the property owner to keep it at that situation rather than the structure to be elevated?
So I apologize, Mohammed. I didn't quite catch your initial question. There was just a little bit of background noise. If you're not talking, please just mute yourself so we don't get some static. So what did you say, Mohammed? Can you repeat it again?
Yeah, well, my question, for example, if I have if I have a property minus rated, like with 18 inches or 12 inches below base flood elevation, so I'm pretty sure my insurance cost, my flood insurance will be very expensive.
Right.
So what will be beneficial for me to keep it at that elevation, or do something with my structures, get elevated, or do something else with it, because my insurance will be very expensive to me. Right?
Yeah, and I think that that's part of what that's part of what the exercise is really trying to figure out. I mean, we want to address the properties on the minus rated list and figure out why there are 89 when there really, you know, it would make sense that there wouldn't be as many in that scenario. And then to try to address the properties individually to figure out why they are on the minus rated list. We think that there are many that shouldn't be, and figure out how those properties could be mitigated or just clarified and corrected when the EC has been incorrectly either created or the agent has incorrectly imputed the data. So those actions will help address the scenario that you're describing, where the property owner would be paying a higher premium than they probably should be. So I think it's all your comment is all related to what this work group meeting has been all about. Anyone else have any questions or comments for Ken?
Mary, this is Ken Evans. I have to look at this minus rated list with more than just a little bit of suspicion. It is not collected in a fashion that you can draw any conclusion from. And I think we've put our localities into a goose chase, chasing down policies that supposedly aren't rated correctly. All flood policies get looked at renewal. If there have been changes because of datum changes, map changes, et cetera, they're re-rated at renewal. The data that we've collected today, far superior to the data that we had 20 or 30 years ago. And I suspect that this process was flawed from the beginning. And to suggest that this report somehow is reflective of a major problem where policies are under paying premium to the disadvantage of the private flood marketplace, that also tells me that there's an agenda that doesn't seem to be consistent with us taking a look at our data and making sure that we are correctly doing things. Everybody who does business with the National Flood Insurance Program is under constant review for the data that we submit. Even if you don't understand how to read an elevation certificate, the people at NFIP or Write Your Own do. And they will come back and ask for more documentation, including current photos, including putting measuring rules up next to a vent. So I, again, am more than just a bit suspicious of this whole process. I'm not sure that it's worthy of taking everybody's time to try to go and backtrack and look at all of these policies and look for some systemic problem.
So you're in favor of the approach that Chesapeake, Rob Braidwood, has suggested, that we take it to the top. See if FEMA, if that meeting could provide useful.
I am. I just, from all of the examples that we're looking at, I do not see where this has got a pattern that makes any sense whatsoever. I think we've taken a much too oversimplified approach to collecting data and then making some aspersions about how this adversely affects the NFIP, the communities, or the private marketplace. You know, every time I hear private marketplace, I also go off on a different tangent because supposedly they don't use these data sets to develop their rates. So, you know, I think that in general, I have less confidence in our bureaucracies and our government organizations than I may have had a few years ago. So you'll forgive me for not being quite so trusting that somebody's produced a report that really has no way of defining the results of the report, and yet we're accountable for the results.
Well, I think that let's try to work on creating a document that distills some of our questions into the most principal issues, and then let's move forward and give that to the Chesapeake team. So if someone wants to head that process up, if there's a volunteer, that would be great. Please indicate via chat or unmute yourself, and I'll coordinate with you and with the Chesapeake team, whoever you are. Maybe Chesapeake team will head it up, but if someone else wants to be intimately engaged, maybe Ken, volunteering you, I don't know.
Yep.
So this is Kristen. I'm not volunteering right now because I have enough things to do, but I do just want to make a comment. One thing that might be helpful, because I agree with Ken. I don't think it's a good use of your time to try to track down all 700 of your properties and figure out whether or not they really are or are not on the minus rated list. We do have to use it as part of the CAV as just a potential indicator of issues to kind of narrow down our look, but it's not an end all be all, and you have to take it with a grain of salt because it is just pulling data and there's not any real tie to compliance with that. But one thing that I think might be valuable that could be done, through the work group is to have some kind of like fact sheet for property owners related to flood insurance. And this could be something that Rob takes to Region 3, because I think it would make sense for FEMA to make it since they're the ones, behind the policy piece of it. But something that kind of explains minus rated, maybe like common issues that come up that could impact your flood insurance rate, like, the enclosure in a V zone if it's over 299 square feet, or flood vents only on one side, or your mechanicals not elevated even though your first floor is 5 feet above BFE, those kinds of things. So it's almost like a checklist for, like new property owners that they can look at if they need flood insurance. And then also just a breakdown of, something to check on their policy, because most insurance agents, from my experience of outside of Ken, like Ken Somerset mentioned, they don't provide a lot of feedback, and we're still getting a lot of comments from insurance agents that tell people they can't even buy a policy even though their community's in the NFIP. So something like that document that you can just push out to property owners to do their due diligence, but kind of hold their hand without having to do it 700 times, through a conversation. I think that would be helpful. And then that could give owners kind of a checklist to look at, and you could point them back to you to come back and talk about it, but not necessarily put you on the hook for doing all of it. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but you could also point to things in your ordinance, because a lot of you are already doing things in your ordinance to prevent minus rated properties. You have freeboard, you have the exclusions for the 300 square foot or larger enclosures. Some of you have free of obstruction requirements. So you're doing a lot of things already in your ordinance to reduce this. The building code has a lot of that as well. But maybe this outreach piece could help.
Okay, good suggestion. I was just going back through Rich's presentation, and nothing that there were 2 additional slides, and they are all things that have been covered pretty well in this meeting, so I'm not going to go back through them. Doug Reedy from ISO asked that I be sure to include the notice that starting on January 1st, 2021, the freeboard requirement for Class 8 and higher communities, Class 8 and better communities, is in place. And so all of those communities have to have 1 foot of freeboard. For our work group, those that are most engaged in the CRS work group, I'm sorry if you hear a baby crying, that's what's happening over here, are in compliance with that freeboard requirement. I haven't reviewed all of our communities to ensure that's the case, but shouldn't be too bad for everyone. And I don't know if this is new information, but this is what is happening. And there is a link to an FAQ that will be hyperlinked in the PDF version of these PowerPoint slides on our CRS Workgroup website. Sorry, Kristen, go ahead.
Sorry, just to chime in real quick, this shouldn't impact anyone because the building code requires 1 foot of freeboard for all residential structures. However, if you didn't have that documented in your last verification visit, then you might need to document it. I asked ISO after they did a webinar for us on this, I don't know, a week or so ago. And there were like 4 communities in Region 3 that they identified as potentially not meeting this requirement, which could just mean that they didn't document it last time. I asked them if any of those were in Virginia. I have not gotten an answer. Doug, if you know if any of them are in Virginia, I would appreciate it because then we can just reach out to them and let you know. But it's in the building code, so even if it's not on your in your ordinance, you should still be covered. You just need to document it.
Sorry, I'm muted. So that's what I had from Doug, but Doug, if you'd like to chime in and add anything, please feel free to.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. I've got a lot of screens in front of me, so I don't know which one's working. Yes, and this notification came out in the February-March CRS newsletter, and hopefully everyone's receiving that newsletter, so hopefully it's not a surprise. And that FAQ that Mary Carson has a link to has come from FEMA. It's a very good FAQ document, and it should answer all your questions. And that 1 foot freeboard, as far as CRS is concerned, is synchronized with the freeboard credits that are available. And that 1 foot freeboard means that a minimum of 100 credits or points have to be available for that CRS Class 8 community to Class 5 to meet that mandatory freeboard in the CRS. So you have to meet that first level of freeboard, 1 foot, which is 100 points, to meet the prerequisite. And this prerequisite does begin on January 1st, 2021. So if you have a cycle visit at that time or after that time, you will be required to meet this prerequisite. And I really believe that most communities in Virginia are meeting this prerequisite. But Kristen, I'll take a look around and see what I come up with and get back to you on that. But I really don't think it's going to be an issue for many communities at all in the state of Virginia, which is really great. I'm glad to see that. Also, we've been talking a lot today about elevation certificates, and I hope everyone's accepting or are receiving the new elevation certificate that will be expiring on November 30th of 2022. Now, FEMA has not made any changes to this elevation certificate, but you should be receiving the ones that do expire on November 30th, 2022, and really you should have been accepting these from February. So if someone, an engineer, brings in one of the older ones that has expired, say 2018, you will need to accept one that expires in 2022 to make it valid. Now, I did find that there was one minor change, not in the document, but in how the document is utilized. That's in Section A, Property Information, Item A4. This is the building use, residential, non-residential, addition, accessory, and so on. It is mandatory that there be an entry in this item. Evidently, it was not mandatory before, but it is now. And if there is no entry for item A4, then it will be shown as an error when it's reviewed. So do make sure you keep up your reviews on your elevation certificates, and do remember that this building use in Section A is now mandatory. It must be filled in to be completely correct.
Sorry, Doug, can you repeat the section? It's A4, but in section which?
It's Section A, Property Information, Item A4, Building Use. So you would put in residential, commercial, addition, accessory, whatever the building use is. Evidently, previous to this time, it was not mandatory to fill that in, which I'm surprised to find out, but now it is. So if you don't have item A4 filled out for building use, it will be looked at as an error. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're reviewing your ECs when they come into your department.
I just made that note here on the in the chat too. Thank you, Doug.
Good. And also with Kristen's thought on the minus rated properties, I must say that that's an excellent idea to notify these homeowners of what may or may not be going on with their flood insurance rating. And also for everyone out there, this is a very straightforward targeted outreach project for you. Similar to the repetitive loss letter, I see it as an outreach kind of like that. A chance to really inform your homeowners on this problem, and also, grab some more outreach project credits as well for something that's really important.
It's great. Thank you, Doug.
Mhm.
And
sorry, can I ask Doug a question real quick about elevation certificates?
Yes.
So I put this question into FEMA and I haven't gotten a response yet. So I don't know if you know, but ISO sent out the message that said communities have to start using the new one as of February 21st, or it will be considered an error in their review. But when we reached out to FEMA when the new one was released, they said there was no transition period and that people could continue using the old one.
Really?
So none of our localities were informed that they had to start using it on February 21st until the CRS newsletter came out like a month later. So I've asked FEMA about this because I think it's unfair for CRS, because all of you guys on the call pretty much asked me about it, and we asked FEMA and they said no transition period. So I'm just curious if maybe you can ask about that. I just emailed FEMA again following up while we're on the call to see if they have an answer, but that is an issue that we may run into because, nobody was really told that at that day you must switch.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that it's February of this year, and that did come up that people didn't know. Communities were not aware. That has come up in my meetings and conversations internally, and also I believe ISO with FEMA. So let me look into that for you as well. See if I can clarify that for everyone, and get back to you. Because there may be some new information, but yes, your experience is the same as mine as far as not the notification not being out there. But I believe that also was in the February-March CRS newsletter. So let me dig around some, Kristen. Yeah, and get back to you with some clarification if I can find it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Doug.
Uh-huh.
So we have just under 15 minutes. If people want to do report outs, we would love to hear from everybody. It's just a free for all. You can unmute yourself and go, and we'll try to do it that way. You can also, if you're having audio problems, you can provide an update in the chat. Would you prefer if I called on you? Or do people just have nothing to report?
Mary Carson, this is Tristan from the city of Norfolk. We don't really have much else to report other than we're currently working on our open CAV. We've met with Kristen regarding how to deal with the strategy with that. And we're also going to apply for our class modification from a class 7 to a 5 at the end of August. So I'm plugging away at that right now.
Great, thank you, Tristan.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Mary, this is Brent McGloster. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So two things in the flood. I think it was the last Flood Friday. I brought up the issue we were having at the time with VIMS submitting under the Executive Order 45 for local floodplain compliance with one project and some future projects that they have designed. And so where we currently sit with that is I've, after going back and forth with our county attorney and, as always, a lot of guidance with Paul, our building official, who y'all know, and is here. Where we landed was I sent comments back to where we requested that they obtain a permit under our floodplain ordinance, but in the attorney's opinion, we cannot force them to obtain a permit under citing some 70s era rulings that is believed to apply even in light of Executive Order 45. So I don't think VIMS is going to object or maybe even have the same opinion. But
Brent, can I stop you?
Sure.
Does everyone know what you're talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm sorry. Are you talking about Executive Order 45 or?
I'm talking about what
the whole
you're
thing?
talking, the whole thing. What are you talking about?
Okay. So VIMS has submitted to Gloucester County a site plan for review to comply with our local floodplain ordinance.
Okay.
And
for a project. One of their projects on Gloucester
a development,
Point.
yes.
Okay.
In Gloucester Point. Thank you. So this has not happened in Gloucester before to where they submitted to us, they asked us for approval, and given Executive Order 45.
Which requires freeboard for state properties, new standards for freeboard.
Right, and local floodplain compliance.
Yes, good.
So, and in this case, our local floodplain regulations exceeded or required additional efforts on the project than what they had been proposing.
Great.
So well, yes and no. And I think this was a particular sticky wicket because it was in design while EO 45 was being executed. So there's still some question as to how much, well, I think in my opinion it's pretty clear, but there's some question among DGS and VIMS as to how much of the Executive Order EO 45 actually applies. So so anyway, I guess going back to where I was, what I was stating earlier is after several rounds going back and forth with our county attorney, just to make sure we have the authority to do what we're requiring them to do, we just now issued the comment letter, and VIMS is coordinating with DGS and their parent organization, the engineering. Or is it the engineering? Someone help me out here. State engineering department that's above them, but at any rate, so I guess I'll just keep everyone up to date because it's not something we see every day. But my concern all along is if we don't ensure that the state complies, and then we are audited, then sorry everyone, if we are audited, then just like a resident not being in compliance, then we have an issue, and we'd have to bring them. We have to force them to comply following the audit.
Brent, this is really interesting. I wasn't aware of this issue at all, and I think that you are the first community that has gone through an EO 45 project. And so we'll be looking to you on how this unfolds, and I'm glad that you're standing strong against them. The good news is that a lot of the VIM staff helped create the premise of EO45, or at least helped inform some of that process. And so, I don't know, maybe you can.
Unfortunately, none of them are the project managers.
Yeah, too bad.
But it's been interesting. So just wanted to update the group, and I can certainly keep you all informed as we go along. I really don't have a feel yet as to whether they're going to continue to resist it.
That's
the other item, which is I think maybe more of maybe a newbie question on my part, but on our hazard mitigation team, we advertise homeowner information, their name, their address, the tax map number, for the construction and elevation bids. And to me, it seems as though that may be not in compliance with FEMA's privacy policy. VDEM's perspective is that the information is not originated from the rep loss list, and therefore it does not have to comply with FEMA's privacy policy. I don't see how the information originates anywhere other than the rep loss list, so there's some confusion on my part. I don't know if anyone had experience in this, if this is, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel on it, so if anyone had any thoughts, it would be very helpful.
So I'll just comment on that because I heard from VDEM about this, and from my understanding, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the whole thing because I was also chatting with Tom about the building code, so I'm trying to listen. But my understanding was that the question was about including addresses in just a bid for doing like mitigation work and not necessarily listing that they're repetitive loss. Is that what the issue was? Just listing the addresses?
Right. It's their names. Historically, we've had their names, their addresses, and their tax map numbers, and I think that's it.
Yeah, so I mean, you're allowed to list addresses and things, you just can't say they're repetitive loss. So the address and parcel information is all public information. You just can't tie any of that back to say this specific property is a repetitive loss property, or this property had claims data. You can talk about the properties and you can talk about flood damage as long as the damage is something that you can pull from like your local information, but you can't say specifically it's repetitive loss. So if you were going to put out a bid, it would have to be vague, to say these properties are just being mitigated. You couldn't say these are being targeted because they're repetitive loss properties, or that they have an insurance policy or whatever.
Well, that's good to hear, because that means we have been compliant with FEMA's privacy policies and where they don't apply. It's just, to me, I guess logically, if someone tells me, like if Ken and Prakosan tells me he's elevating a house, I would just assume already that it's a rep loss house, because that's tends to be, our target homes. But if that's just an assumption and it's not something that we tie together in writing, then and it's okay. I guess that's all right. So I appreciate the help.
Thanks, Gloucester. Anybody else? Okay, well, this has been really, really a great meeting, and it's nice to see all your faces. I have to admit, I'm missing seeing people in person. People in general, but also y'all. Thanks, everyone. Stay healthy. I will be posting all of our resources from the meeting, PowerPoint. I will include the chat history in addition. And then a presentation as well, like the recording and our commentary and all that stuff will be made available as well on the website. If you have a problem with that, just email me. But, it seems like there were a lot of people emailing me to say that they wouldn't be available. So if it's cool with people, I'll make that available on our website as well. Similarly, how I've done in other meetings, the video itself is embedded within the meeting materials page on the website. Okay, great. Well, I don't think we've ever ended a meeting this on time before, ever. So good job, us. Okay, yeah, there are some addresses for Jay's presentation. Okay, good. Thank you, Kristen, for noting that. I'll be sure